We'll do a bunch of stuff. I love that tune.
Hello, good evening, and welcome to Field Talk. I am the Field, also known as Field of Bears, here to remind you that socialism always ends in starvation and genocide. If you want to sow the field, you can go to paypal.me/fieldtalk and throw some change into my hat. Come on. And tonight, I forgot to print off the monologue, so I'm going to read it off the screen, and you'll have to simply bear with me. On diplomacy and dialogue. It's not a secret that states are often antagonistic toward each other. Many times this will result in merely bitter sports rivalries among the populations, which is fine. Worst case scenario, however, is war. War is not inevitable, though. Sometimes antagonistic parties can have a dialogue with each other in order to find a reconciliation to their differences, or at least a non-violent path forward. This dialogue will sometimes appear to be different things to the uninformed observer, since the only ones who are truly informed are the participants, which may be confusing or upsetting. Sometimes it is necessary to placate the ego of your negotiating opponent. Sometimes it is necessary to display a willingness to walk away. Sometimes it is necessary to show a willingness to compromise. Sometimes it is necessary to draw a red line and enforce it with extreme prejudice. As I have often said, I did not vote for Donald Trump. In fact, I wrote in a dog because I live in California, where voting for president doesn't count anyway, because this state is basically as corrupt as a third world nation. Anyway, when I criticize Trump, it doesn't reflect on me because I did not throw in with him. And the inverse is true as well. I have also repeatedly made it known how passionately I feel about the plight of those living under the murderous doctrines of socialism in its various failed iterations. Ooh, goodness. When people started ginning up war rhetoric against the DPRK, I just about lost it. Those people are slaves. They have no choice in what their despotic leadership does, and the guilty parties would mostly escape the fires of war. This is why when Kim Jong-un started making concessions, I nearly cried. For over 8 decades, nothing changed. The Kims would rattle their sabers. The US would either threaten to glass them or send them aid or give them nuclear material and a reactor bill. And nothing changed except maybe the Hermit Kingdom became more, not less, entrenched. What changed? I can only credit Donald J. Trump. I'm serious. There's no other explanation. I can't think of anything else that changed. Trump's hard line, big ask, and small concessions strategy actually worked. I don't see why people can't understand that he's doing the same exact thing with Vladimir Putin. Putin. I don't know how to pronounce his name properly. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that. Normally I have fun nicknames for other countries, but Russia frightens me, so I don't dare. Maybe it's because the opposing forces of society aren't speaking with each other right now. Those forces are, of course, the conservative and liberal temperaments. Liberally minded people need to be in society to explore, to test out new ideas, to bring back new resources. Their openness is extremely valuable, and without it, our society would stagnate and die. We need conservatively minded people as well, because they're the ones who will take that new information and incorporate it into the existing knowledge structure. They take the results of the new ideas being tested and argue for or against adopting the ideas tested. They can make efficient use of those new resources, and they also maintain the borders. That last one is particularly important. Borders. This is why I prefer to print things. I don't lose my place so easily. Because without distinctions between societies, they will overrun each other, and the testing grounds for particular ideas will become indistinguishable, rendering their results unintelligible. The liberally minded people have been taken over by a malignant idea. The outcomes ought to be equal in the absence of malice. They have tested this idea repeatedly, and it has failed to bear fruit and should have been discarded. The trouble is that ideas are alive. They're living things, and they dislike being discarded because that is their death. And they'll hurt you on the way out. Believe you me, if you throw out an idea that's in your head, it will not feel good. They really don't like being thrown out. Their openness, the liberals' openness, has left them vulnerable to possession. And it is the responsibility of the conservatives to bring them back into sanity. I don't know what a mutant like me is supposed to do in this whole equation, but I'm trying to identify problems for the liberals and conservatives to parse out. Maybe we mutants are supposed to facilitate you nutters talking to each other. Whew. There we go. Let's see what you guys are talking about. Saying hello to each other mostly. Yeah. Yeah, well, I could read that as Putin, actually. So I'm not entire. I don't know how the Russians should be pronounced. I don't understand Russian at all in the slightest. Even after listening to a bunch of Russian books by the great Dostoevsky. And I only know that one because I've heard it before. But I've heard people say Putin and Putin, so I don't know if that's just the British messing things up with their accent or not. Drunken Bear, you're not being fair to the temperament. The temperament of liberally minded people is openness to new ideas. It does leave them vulnerable to being possessed by particularly virulent ideas such as socialism, though. And it's really your job, the conservatives' job, to grab them by the ears and drag them away and let the idea die. Oh, I'm sorry to see you go, Kodiak a Bear. I'm glad you came, though. Come back later, listen to our discussion, and then we can, and then leave a comment and continue the conversation. Because even though Owen will make fun of this idea if he ever sees it, it is important to actually speak with each other, having a conversation. Just don't have a conversation about conversations, obviously. All right, Kodiak has to go pick up his chillins, his cubs, his ankle biters, those things, and that's an excellent thing. Those guys are much more important than a mutant in a room talking about this esoteric thing called diplomacy. So yeah, I actually read the statements by Putin and Trump that they just put out after their summit, and it's like, I mean, everyone seems to forget that about 7 years. No, it's longer. Is it how long ago was it? But I think it was somewhere. Well, Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, so it wasn't even that long ago. It was during Obama's second term, I think, the first half of his second term, where Hillary Clinton was. Well, my memory's all mixed up, but you know, Hillary Clinton actually gave the Russian ambassador a reset button for the diplomatic relationship between Russia and the greatest nation on earth. The most frightening nation on earth and the greatest nation on earth. Oh boy, that's quite a couple of competitors there, I think. Well, Drunken Bear says that diplomacy only works with those willing to listen. Those who won't listen, and he identifies leftists there, will never concede and never agree, never stop their agenda, hence starvation and genocide. And I think that Drunken Bear is correct. But I want to kind of separate the people who are irrevocably possessed from those who are simply liberally minded and have been tricked by the former group into propagating their agenda without realizing where it leads, or what the implications behind it are, or even what it actually is. Because not everyone, Nimmer makes fun of me for being autistic enough to have actually read On the Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith when I was 17. Well, exactly. Ryan brings up the point that we need to talk not to convert our opponent. Usually, sometimes it is. Sometimes you can actually have a personal conversation with somebody who's got a different temperament to you, somebody who might disagree with you on a certain point, and the two of you might actually come closer, or your positions might be refined against each other to get closer to the correct way forward if you're speaking with each other honestly. But if you're speaking with someone who definitely will not move, then what you're really trying to do is speak with the audience, with the observers, and demonstrate and use that person to demonstrate why your positions are more correct than their positions. Well, people fall for things all the time because they don't have the time to research. Not everyone is smart enough to realize when they're being tricked. Not everyone, and that's not necessarily a dig. Yeah, what society is a negotiation between liberally minded people and conservatively minded people, with a few mutants like me thrown in there to facilitate you guys when you won't speak properly. And I don't know if they'll speak to me because I'm so mutated that I'm even outside of, I'm outside of conservatism and outside of liberalism. I'm just like completely anti-state, like Molyneux is. Except it's like I can compare states to each other. That's not the same as endorsing a state. I think that the U.S. is the greatest state on earth, but it's still a state which is inherently immoral. Yeah, Drunken Bear brings up that it's not about converting the loonies; it's persuading onlookers. Oh, yeah, the hard left is, and the hard. You're correct in identifying the hard left as unwilling to accept diplomacy. But you're incorrect in saying it's their way or death. It will be their way and death, which is why the conservatives need to stop liberally minded people who are vulnerable to being tricked by the hard left, who have been, as a consequence to their initial openness to ideas, been possessed by a virulent and evil idea to the point where they're no longer in control of their own actions because they're just puppets of an idea at this point, and they might not even be savable. But as a Christian, I find the idea of irredeemable quite contrary to the axioms of my entire existence. So I do like to hold on to this kernel of hope in my heart that every communist might one day see the error of their ways and come back to sanity. A come to Jesus moment, except with economics instead of Jesus. Because, economics just is. It's just the reality. Socialism just cannot work because human desires are infinite and resources are finite, and you need to be able to efficiently have those resources distributed. And capitalism is basically just a system of self-sorting for efficient innovators. That's it. It's really all it is. Is you take off the manacles and say, okay, sort yourselves. Sort yourselves into what you're most efficient at. That's all it really is. And that's not a bad thing. When the most efficient people end up being in control of the most resources, then the most resources can actually do the most good in the world. It's not that. I'm glad that you like that, Jefferson Marx. I'm glad you like it. It's like a come to Jesus moment, only it's economics instead of Jesus. So, yeah. But yeah, this isn't about converting the loonies, obviously, but you do still need to talk to the loonies because there is always that slim chance that one of them might be saved. Just like Christians always have to talk to even the most anti-theist atheists because there's a slim chance that they might be convinced in Christianity or other religious people as well. As like, I know that not everyone is called to be as evangelistic as what you might call an evangelist, but every Christian is called to at least be an exemplar of the gospel, which is why I try very hard to be honest, and I try very hard to be forthright. So, yes. And Jefferson brings up that I'm talking about the boundary between pearls before swine and speaking the truth, and that's correct. Because of my conservative tendencies, I do like to find the boundaries, but due to the fact I'm a mutant, my openness makes me want to find just how far that border can be pushed, and which of the swine aren't actually swine. They're whatever isn't swine that can make actual use of the pearls that are cast before them. So. Yeah, Drunken Bear, we won't judge you at all for your sexual deviance. I mean, okay, maybe we'll judge you a little bit, but we'll tolerate you. But just know that Ryan has different preference, and that is also okay. And you need to respect his borders. All right. Sorry, I couldn't help myself, guys. So I think that there are. I think that you always speak to the. I think that everyone needs to realize that not only are you talking to the individual, right? And you might not even be talking to the individual at all. It's important to recognize when you're speaking with an individual and when you're speaking to a puppet of an idea that is in and of itself a living thing that wants to propagate itself and doesn't like being discarded. Yes, yeah, no, Drunken Bear. We know. See, Drunken Bear, your deviancy comes from drinking the beer while doing it, alright? It's like you need to do that either before or after, not during. How dare you? That is the exact wrong way to drink beer. Yeah, I can roll with it. I can roll with your I can roll with the I can roll with the deflection and continue. That is a dirty, filthy lie. Everyone has seen your beer-soaked bed sheets. I can roll with these, all right? I can roll with pretty much anything, guys. You have not met my family. And when Owen just roasted me, I cracked up. It was great. Oh, that was a fantastic. Oh, that was a fantastic roast by Owen. I'm still laughing at it. Oh, well, Drunken Bear. If that isn't beer, there's only one other thing it can be, and that means you're pulling out like a coward. See, I told you I could roll with it. I told you I could. You guys have my entire family are just roasters, and I'm actually the worst one at it. I'm not even that good because of my mutations. But that's okay. It makes me good at all sorts of other things like pattern recognition and noticing when things are not a part of the pattern and being extremely bothered by it. And also being allergic to change, like my time slot being taken over by one of my personal heroes. Well, yeah, I like hanging. Jefferson Marx does tells us that he identifies with my politics, but says that the conservatives are his peeps, and says that he's classical liberalish, libertarianish, which like that's where I am, except further down the line where where I don't think that there ought to be a state at all, and I think that with enough generations of people not beating their children and not lying to each other and yeah, Ryan agrees with me with and not lying to each other and basically um, basing all of our interactions off of the non-aggression principle, which means every interaction is a voluntary interaction. I think that we can get to a point to where the state is rendered obsolete. When it comes to my anarchy, I'm an obsoletist. I think that we need to work to make the state so unnecessary that the very thought of investing in it via allowing them to point guns at you and take your money away becomes absolutely unthinkable to the point where attempting to enforce taxation would be impossible because just nobody would pay and there wouldn't be enough soldiers to send out to collect the taxes, to put down the tax rebellion, as it were, for two reasons. One, because the general population always outnumbers the army, and two, the population from which you would draw the army also agrees that no, we shouldn't be paying taxes because taxation is theft. So I think that if we can build that sort of culture, I think if we can build that, then we would get to the stateless society. Well, no. See, yeah, the conservatives allow libertarianism. The conservatives also allow liberalism. It's very, very important. You guys are very important. Like, don't get me wrong. Just because I'm a mutant doesn't mean I don't think that conservatives are extremely important. Like, we really do need you guys to draw out the lines to show where the borders are, because without the distinctions between concepts, peoples, um, land areas, without those distinctions, we can't actually formulate the new ideas that need testing. No one can actually move forward without knowing where we are, and like, and you can't compare where you are to what could be without also knowing what the boundaries of where you are actually, you know, are, even though I'm using the word are too much. That I'm Drunken Bear says that uh, state probably needs to exist, and I think it's entirely possible, and I'm willing to concede that it might be possible, but I'm also insistent that we haven't yet built a culture that is so individualistic that a state would be untenable yet. So, hey, Semper Fi Bear. I disagree with you, Ryan. The state currently with our current culture is necessary because our current culture is a statist one. Let's see. I don't know if you do not have a wrench, so no, you cannot. But I can give you a wrench because you have been making good points. So I will give you. And Drunken Bear has also made good points, and he rolled with being roasted. So you get a wrench as well. Now you can post links. Yeah. Hey, Semper Fi Bear. How's it going? How's it going, B West? You guys had warning from the Big Bear himself that I would be going on, so. And I know you guys were watching Big Bear. Come on. Ratchet as slang irritates the heck out of me, guys. All right, it's good to hear that it's going all right. You know, I wish my little brother was on the Twitter. I'd hook you guys up and you could talk about the Marine Corps and all that. Even though he never went to combat, he was stationed in Okinawa and did a lot of jump training. Yeah, I'm glad I'm not the only one who was irritated as all get out at Ratchet as slang. It's a flipping tool, guys. See, Drunken Bear, that's a really, 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 really interesting idea. See, what if a population itself is A, extremely unarmed, and B, unwilling to accept being conquered? Because Drunken Bear brings up organized military for defense of specific land masses. Like, other nations wouldn't care about our property rights, true. But if the culture within a specific geographical location all agree that as long as they have voluntary interactions with each other, their society will be superior to other societies, and they see a statist society attempting to conquer their neighbors, and their neighbors ask for help, then probably it's not going to go so well for the invaders. But it is possible that the invaders will end up wiping out the stateless society entirely because the free people will not accept being conquered and will eventually killed off, even though they're all well armed. They might not be as well armed as the statist society. But it's a really interesting question because it's entirely possible that the stateless society may overcome the statist military with superior tactics, like those employed in asymmetrical warfare that have actually caused, caused the Taliban to defeat Russia and Afghanistan, and then to drag us into like nearly 20 years of war in the same region, as well as our defeat in Vietnam. But that was due more to propaganda battle than a military one. I understand that the Marine Corps and Army are insistent that they never lost a single battle. So, I don't know how it would shake up. I can't say for certain whether the stateless society would be able to effectively fend off an invading force, but I also am unwilling to write them off because smaller forces have held out and even been victorious against larger, better armed, and more technologically advanced forces in history. And I don't see why that same couldn't apply to a highly individualistic culture that has such a high value on its individualism that being armed is ubiquitous. And I think that the culture would also need to have a very strong martial spirit. So I think that probably it's not fair to call the Middle East stateless, Ryan. They are just not recognized by the other states. They are definitely statist. So I would have a bone of contention on that. See, Drunken Bear, they would rather live their standard of living. And their standard of living is basically just not being conquered. Could you imagine what their economy would be like if they weren't currently being invaded by an outside extremely powerful military? Like if their infrastructure wasn't constantly being destroyed, if Hillary Clinton wasn't, you know, purposely destroying their ability to have clean water and causing the spread of dysentery and disease in their society, if people weren't constantly being shot at, if there weren't constant suicide bombings, like, could you imagine what their standard of living would be without that? See, no, Jefferson Bear. Actually, no. The prime example I would give of a decentralized force defeating a highly advanced, highly efficient military force would actually be the militias against uh, the Crown's Imperial Royal, no, the Imperial Royal Army and Imperial Royal Navy in the American Revolution. The congressionally authorized regulars were actually the minority of fighters and didn't actually win very many battles. It was the decentralized militias that actually caused enough damage to the imperial forces to cause their continued attempts to retain the colonies untenable. And the Buckskin Indians actually maintained their societies for almost 100 years before they were overwhelmed by American technology due to the fact that many of the warring tribes refused to integrate new technology out of superstitious or cultural reasons. Yes, Drunken Bear, you are correct in saying that the U.S. is superior to the non-invaded Middle Eastern countries. However, they are not war-torn hellholes at the moment, which is superior to the other countries in the region. And Semper Fi does bring up a good point that Iraq, Afghanistan, and other countries in the region were not defined by themselves, but by the British Empire. And that is also true. Those cultures actually they have a hard time with that borders because they were nomadic. Like their nation was wherever the sheep could graze. See, the thing about the nukes is it's kind of interesting. If your intention is to conquer, I think you're very unlikely to actually use nuclear weapons. They're more of a defensive weapon than an offensive one. And this is going to sound a little bit wild, but hear me out for a second. Nuclear weapons as an offensive weapon don't make sense because they are so destructive to the area that you wish to conquer that it renders large portions of it absolutely uninhabitable and unusable for decades and perhaps even centuries, especially the H bomb. So the reason why, and so that would make them pretty much useless as an offensive weapon because then your newly conquered land is a nuclear wasteland and you can't use it for anything and you just wasted your nukes. So I don't think there's actually a lot of danger of nuclear weapons ever being used as a means of conquest unless you get somebody with an IQ of below 80 in charge of nukes. That would have been me, but the rule is if anyone censors, they lose their wrench. And Dom got in trouble for censoring Nimmer because I was talking about how you shouldn't walk around in undershirts like a heathen. Yeah. Yeah. Mutually assured destruction is if you shoot nukes at us, we shoot nukes back at you, which means both of us go out, which means that you don't actually take out a competitor for a world hegemon. See, the reason why there's even a threat of nuclear war is because other countries want to be the world hegemon. Other countries want to be able to dictate terms to the rest of the world over how trade and prosperity shall be handled. And currently, the US is world hegemon, and the US gets to dictate to other countries how tariffs and how trade and how the sea lanes and how airways all operate because we have the military, well, the US has the military might to back up their assertions. See, Drunken Bear. That's Drunken Bear says that the Second World War needed to be fought, and I can see that argument. I can, but there's also the fact that Nazi Germany would have collapsed even faster than Soviet Russia because they attempted to industrialize to a far higher degree and were even more reckless with their resources than the Soviet Union was. So, shortly after conquering France, Britain, and possibly Spain, they would have suffered major economic collapse and would have thrown Europe into another depression, but the US would have been coming out of its depression without having spent a bunch of resources, blood, and treasure on another war, putting us in a position to possibly proliferate free trade as an alternative and bring Europe into the light of freedom to a greater degree. So, while there's a possibility that Nazi Germany being victorious would have caused them to continue their march of conquest, I think that their economic model was so dysfunctional that it wouldn't have been able to support their empire. Well, that's the point, Drunken Bear. We really don't know how the world would look. And the point, and on top of that, okay, all right. So, so here's a very interesting idea about being needing to defend a specific geographical location from invasion from statist entities such as imperial armies or uh, socialistic takeovers and all of that. But here's a good thought. If it is necessary, then wouldn't that be a market need? Is it okay for me to play a thing? I don't know. Will I get copy stricken? It's loading now.
Arguments. The fear of consequences, you understand, is not an argument. Saying everything will be better, saying everything will be worse.
Yes, I did see that. Yeah. So if I try and play this, there will be a lot of echo, and I'm not good at doing that stuff. But actually, yeah, that was actually a very interesting conversation. But it's something that I had thought about before. Seeing Molyneux's conversation about small state versus no state. I attempted to play the video. I'm not very good at doing responses, and we're almost at. We have about 10 minutes left. Yeah. All right. So I probably won't get copy stricken by Molyneux. You're saying I didn't know. It's like when I look at the link, I don't know it's Molyneux though. When I see it in the chat, right? So that was my main concern, because if it's like a random song, then the crawler bots would take me down, and I'm a very small channel. I won't have very much recourse, and we're almost at the end. I think I do remember. I do remember that Molyneux pointed out that if it is necessary to defend a geographical location from invasion, then that would be a market need, and firms for the purpose of defense would be formed and would compete for contracts to guarantee against invasion on an insurance-based model. And if invasion does happen, then they have the funds for defense already saved up, and possibly they would have bought property along the border and constructed obstructions and defensive what would you call them, emplacements. So I think that he brought that up in that conversation, but the timestamp you gave me, I think it's the part where he talks about, I'm afraid of what might happen is not an argument, because nobody ever knows what might happen. No, you can't know what might happen. You can know the probabilities. You can know that currently, in the current system, we have what you're talking about. We currently have a state. We currently have an immoral system that immorally takes away resources from you in order to bribe other people to give them more power. So saying that you're afraid that might happen isn't an argument, because we already have that. Yeah, imagine if other geographical locations had to be in charge of their own defense. Imagine that. It would be a very different world. And we all know now that the collapse of the Soviet Union was inevitable. So imagine if we didn't waste all of our money with NATO and instead just allowed them to collapse themselves. So just there's that to think about. Now I'm going to go ahead and end it 6 minutes early, guys, because my niece is visiting and she is knocking on my studio door. And while I like you guys all tremendously, really, from the bottom of my heart, I like you all, you are nowhere near as adorable as my niece. So what I'm going to say is, if you enjoyed this stream, please go ahead and hit like, share it, watch it later, comment when it goes, when it lets you comment, like in 15 minutes. Share your thoughts about it when you share the link on Twitter, please. And really just keep on talking to each other about the ideas that were put forth. And if you want to sow the field, that will be paypal.me/fieldtalk. Social links are in the description. Follow. And if you want to see more streams from me, go ahead and subscribe. Hit the bell if you want to be notified. Hopefully it will. And this has been Field Talk. And I am the Field, also known as Field of Bears. Have a great night, and never forget that socialism always ends in starvation and genocide.